What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Redonkulous Gaming. Today we are going to get into some beta gameplay in Shadowlands with our Blood Death Knight, and we are going to be joining the Necrolord Covenant, which is going to grant us the ability Abomination Limb. If you're not familiar with what this ability does, this is where you sprout an additional limb. Yes, you get an extra arm for 12 seconds. Every 1 second, you're going to deal 22.5% of your attack power as shadow damage to all nearby enemies, not just one, but all nearby enemies, and you're going to pull an enemy to your location if they are further than 8 yards away from you. So this is a really nice utility to have when you're running in dungeons, especially if you have spellcasters that you're just having a hard time silencing to bring them in. So overall, it adds a little bit of utility, does a little bit of damage, and it's up for a total of 12 seconds. This is on a 2-minute cooldown as it stands today, and Blizzard has roughly about a month or so until launch so that they can make some changes to abilities if they decide to do that. The other ability that is worth mentioning, especially as a tank, is Fleshcraft. Now, Fleshcraft is the Covenant-based skill that doesn't matter what class you're joining the Necrolords with, you're going to get access to this. If you don't know what Fleshcraft does, this is where you form a shield of flesh that amounts to 20% of your maximum health, and that can stay up for up to 2 minutes or until you get hit enough times that it ends up falling off. Now, the neat thing about this is if you channel near a corpse or corpses or dead things, you'll be able to potentially build that shield up to about 50% of your total health pool. So, effectively, you can walk into a boss fight having already cleared some trash with 150% of your health, which is a really nice utility and certainly worth calling out for the sake of tanking. So if you haven't watched our videos in the past, we're going to look to answer 3 key things about Blood Death Knight aligning with Necrolords. First and foremost, how does the class ability feel? How does Abomination Limb feel to play? Is it a skill that you look forward to casting, or is it just something you set it, forget it, and you move on? The next thing we're going to look at is that ability strength, and we're probably going to talk a little bit about Fleshcraft too as we go throughout, because you can't really do one without the other. And then last but not least, and probably most importantly, is whether or not this ability is going to be viable in more than one type of content, or if it is only viable for one type of content, what is that content, and we'll get into that here shortly. So let's start off with how the ability feels. I will say that there is something really very cool and thematic about sprouting an extra limb that lasts for 12 seconds and having it slap your targets around. It's completely passive, and it is something that just kind of looks really neat. It's a fun ability to see this little green arm waving around very quickly. And overall, the problem with it is that it is on such a long cooldown. I feel as though a 2-minute cooldown, while that doesn't sound overly long, there's going to be places that you're going to want to end up saving Abomination Limb for right now. It's not going to be used for every single pack. It doesn't do a whole lot of damage overall to your enemies. It's actually something that can be outperformed just by your basic rotation on a pretty regular basis. So unless Blizzard does something to increase the overall effectiveness in terms of the damage that it does, the only thing that you're gaining by casting this ability is the utility to pull in targets that are not already sitting right on top of you, so 8 yards or further away. So you're likely saving that for trash packs with casters, and you're likely not going to be casting that for any other reason other than the damage when it comes to a boss fight. So this is really more utility oriented. There's no mitigation that comes from this whatsoever. Now, when we pair that though with Fleshcraft, you have a slightly different story. So Fleshcraft is also on a 2-minute cooldown, so same as Abomination Limb, but you're going to be using them in 2 very different circumstances. You're going to want to buff Fleshcraft as much as possible, so you're going to want to take down a large pack, and then you're going to channel Fleshcraft, make sure you take advantage of your shield, and hopefully get that thing up to 50% of your base health. You're then going to go in and likely pull a boss. That way you take advantage of Fleshcraft, or you're pulling yet another big pack. It just kind of depends on the type of content that you're doing, whether it's dungeons or raids or, whatever, fill in the blank. Abomination Limb really doesn't feel all that great to push on a boss or on a single target. It just feels like it's wasted, and it actually doesn't even feel all that exciting or good to cast it when you've got all melee attackers on you. The most fun thing about this ability is you can cast it and you can wrangle people and wrangle mobs that are far enough away that you just see them getting yanked to you once every 2 minutes. That's the most fun thing about this ability. The thing is, as a DK, you already have Death Grip, and you already have Gorfreen's Grasp. So you don't necessarily need another thing that pulls in a target. But again, it's a fun ability because it looks cool. And it's something that is neat, and as I mentioned before, it's thematic overall. So if you're someone who is just more into the thematic side of things, and you don't necessarily care about the damage output that you're getting against a single target or a boss target, then this might be a good covenant for you to align to. But it probably stops right about there, because now we're starting to talk about the ability strength. When we talk about the strength of this ability, I already mentioned that the damage that it does against a single target is rather lackluster. It's not anything that you're all that excited about. It performs decently, but it is outperformed by your basic rotation. So it's not something that's going to top the charts in terms of the meters for you right now. So again, unless Blizzard makes substantial changes to the actual damage output from this, or there's a mitigation piece that comes along with this may be a relatively unattractive thing for a Blood DK that already has Gorfreen's Grasp and the ability to pull targets to them. Now, that's not even getting into conduits and legendaries, because there is a legendary that gives you a chance to completely ignore your Death Grip's cooldown. And if that's the case, and you end up going for that legendary, you really won't need your Abomination Limb all that much. As far as the strength of Fleshcraft, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, because this is a 100% situational ability. It's a strong shield, and it lasts for 2 minutes, unless you go ahead and get it knocked off of you by a pack of mobs or a boss. So it's nice that you have the uptime for 2 minutes, because it's very rare that you're going to go ahead and channel Fleshcraft and then not go directly into another pack or sit around idle for 2 minutes. So you at least have the security, and it is more of like a security blanket, knowing that you have 150 or up to 150, anywhere between 120 and 150% of your health going into an encounter. So Fleshcraft is strong, but again, it's situationally strong. It's weak when you are in a position where you don't necessarily have a large pack to pull, or potentially you're wasting it. So it really comes down to timing it, and not necessarily just casting it for the sake of casting it. So just keep that in mind. Now, let's talk about the viability. And again, these two skills go hand in hand, especially when we're talking about the overall toolkit of the tank. So let's first tackle Abomination Limb and the viability of Abomination Limb. As far as where you're going to feel the most viable, it's likely going to be in tougher Mythic Plus weeks, where you're dealing with Fortified and you're dealing with things that make the trash live longer than it normally would. Reason for that is that it'll help keep all the enemies nearby on top of you as you see fit. It will also help with constant damage on all your targets, because it does tick for 12 seconds. So even though it's not going to be the hardest hitting thing in your toolkit, it's really the only AoE that you have as a Blood DK outside of Death and Decay. So it certainly outperforms Death and Decay. So overall, you're going to feel the most viable in weeks where trash packs are up a little bit longer than most. You're also going to feel more viable in spellcasting dungeons, which you already kind of do as a Death Knight. You have the ability with Anti-Magic Zone and AMS that you don't necessarily have to worry too much about magic dealers or casters in general. So this is just yet another way where DKs are greater than casters in those situations. But when I look to the viability of a skill like Abomination Limb and Raid, that's where I start to scratch my head a little bit, because I don't see where the value of Abomination Limb comes into place in a specific boss fight. It certainly has its place in trash packs, but I don't know that all of us sign up to be blood DKs just so we can be trash heroes. So something to keep in mind there. Fleshcraft, on the other hand, again, in terms of viability, it depends on the situation. It can be situationally strong if you time it right and you cast it in the right place in a dungeon heading into a boss, or if you have 2 bosses back to back, because if you channel on a boss, it's going to automatically give you that 50% shield percentage that you get from larger trash packs. So that's what I mean by the shield can literally be anywhere between 20% and 50% of your base health. So keep that in mind. So the overall viability of these two things in combination with one another is that this is likely going to be more of a toolkit for the Mythic Plusers out there. You're likely not going to see this configuration in Raid unless that person is dead set on the thematics. Now, as far as what Blizzard can do to improve the overall skill so that it is a little bit more viable for Blood DKs, is it needs to add some form of mitigation, maybe in the form of avoidance or something that's passive, where you can flat out say, okay, every time I hit this skill, I'm going to get maybe a 10 or 20% mitigation against all targets, especially with something that's on a 2-minute cooldown. Like, it needs to have a little extra to make it worthwhile. So hopefully that makes sense to you guys. Would love to know your thoughts, though. So please, by all means, drop me a comment below. Let me know if you agree, disagree. Hopefully you're not overly disappointed or excited either way, because things can absolutely change. So this is my asterisk comment where I say we're still in beta. Things can change. And I am hoping that Blizzard does change a few things to make this a little bit more viable, especially in the raid setting.